We are live, or at least that's what it's telling me. I'm just double checking. Yeah, looks all good. So, hi there. I'm Tricia Broderick,
And I'm Diana Larsen.
and we are going to start doing these monthly series. Do you want to, since this is the first one, do you want to describe what we're targeting when we're going to do these lives each month?
Well, Tricia and I just wrote a book together, but wrote a book over the last couple of years. We didn't just write it. It took us a while, but and that was scary. But but it just came out. It's just available now for purchase, and so we're pretty excited about that, to get the feedback from folks who are now reading it and telling us what they like and what they're curious about in it. So we thought we would do these podcasts or these lives once a month, and take a theme each time that relates to lead without blame and what that means, or resilient learning teams. But this time we are focused on leadership horror stories. Seemed like a good theme for this month.
We even set it up with bricks in the background, and neither of us have a green screen right now because I'm traveling.
Yeah.
And so we got like kind of a ghost kind of feel of going in and out right now too.
It's great. Yeah.
It's perfect. It's perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so we'll do a different theme each month as we're going to do this. We with our schedules though, we can't be consistent. Like it's going to be the same Thursday it won't work out that way. But I do believe, and I was bad, Diana, maybe you can spot it real quick. We do know when the date for November one will be. So we'll check that before we get off this live for this one. But I did not check it before.
I think it might be the 17th.
That sounds right. But we'll double check it before we finish with the live to highlight when the next one will be. But so horror stories. I actually have to admit, I had a little bit of fun thinking about them. And I'm like, that's kind of jacked up.
Yeah.
But I was thinking about just things that, that stand out, right? And those horror moments that you have, like, did that just happen? And there was an interesting dynamic for me when I was doing it, but I was thinking through and I was able to come up with some that I've done, not just other people, but some of those horror stories. But obviously I'm going to change names and all that, leave it anonymous as we go forward with this. But
for sure. Yeah. Yeah.
So what's one that stood out for you? Like when you were thinking about this, like what was a horror story that popped up for you?
Well, which should we start with? Shall we start with horror stories of us as a leader, or of being in, having leadership inflicted on us as in a horror?
I think it's only fair if we start with our crazy first.
Right.
Like,
okay.
I think it's only fair that we should probably start with our crazy.
Yeah. Well, early in my leadership career, one of my horror stories was a time when one of my boss was out of town. Our boss was out of town, and we were working on a very stressful project. There were lots and lots of moving parts. It was in those days where we were working 60, 70, 80 hours a week, that kind of thing. So everybody was tired. And one of my peers had a breakdown, and my boss was gone. So I was the one that needed to go and figure out how to deal with her. And that was one of the most difficult leadership challenges. And it really was horrifying. I mean, just watching her kind of come apart, and also watching the behaviors that she was exhibiting toward our direct reports. I mean, there was one of our colleague direct reports had created this beautiful poster, and my peer who was having the breakdown went in and ripped it off the wall and said, "We don't need this. I don't know why this is up here," and didn't check. I mean, it was just things. She was really coming apart. I mean, and it was the stress. It was a very stressful job. But I really learned from that horror story, because it lasted pretty much a whole day, because I was trying to get in touch with my boss and what do you want me to do here, and set up a call. And this is in the days before calls were easy. It's all Polycom and stuff. And so getting through that day and being able to find the place in myself where I could kind of stay calm, and I know this is scary, but let's just work our way through it, was one of my very best leadership lessons. Wow. So out of that horror story actually came a great leadership lesson for me. What about you?
Well, I'm still thinking about the fact that she ripped the thing off the wall.
Yeah. That was funny.
I'm gonna own something right out of the bat. And it did also create a huge lesson. But I remember sitting at a client site once, and I was a new project manager, right? And I felt all this responsibility, but I was still kind of a developer at heart, right? I was still a coder at heart. And I remember one of the developers went, "Oh, you can't do that. You can't, that's not possible." And please don't judge me, Diana. I literally ripped the keyboard from his hand. Like I literally took the keyboard away and then started coding it. Like, and I wish I could tell you right in that moment, I went, "Oh, this is not good." Nope. I was committed. Like, and then I even, so humiliating. I even at the end of it was just like, see, like, like, what is wrong with me, right? and it wasn't until like later in the day that I actually went, "Oh, that was not good. That was not." And shockingly, like, that developer did say, and I mean, I think he was probably terrified me in that moment, obviously, right? But he didn't say anything. But it was my moment, like, after that, and I started thinking about it, I was like, that's not good, right? And that's not helping my team. And it actually got me to a place where I went, I ended up realizing the horror of what I did in that moment was me wanting to validate I could still code. Was me wanting to prove that could sit, like, there was arrogance, ego, right, involved in that 100%. And so it got to a place where I was like, I have to start really relying on my other skills if I'm going to take on these different roles. I am not a developer now, right? Like, and starting to change that identity, but definitely not one. To this day, I'm like, if I ever, like, I apologized in that moment, but I still would probably see that developer and just hang my head, right? Like, but yeah, I stole his keyboard. I did it. It's a horror story. It's not a highlight.
Yeah, one of my more recent ones is a situation in which I was the initiator of a project initiative and had a leadership role in it, because I had a clear vision, and that's why I was tapped to do this. I had a very clear vision for it, and then realizing a while later that I was no longer needed to be a visionary. Everybody hadn't understood and had the vision, and that now I had become the bottleneck because everybody thought they had to come to me. And the horrifying part of that was how long it took me to realize that was happening, and what the impact had been on everybody involved. That was a pretty bad one for me.
I actually am now wondering, and this is actually interesting. It makes sense. We talk about it in the book, right? About so many teams have the leader as the hub, right? Yeah. But I actually feel like maybe most leaders have that horror story of realizing they're the bottleneck, like they're the hub, they're the dependency. Because the minute you said it made me think of another moment where I was like, oh no, they're just waiting for me to fix everything each time, right? Like, this is not, why are we doing this? And I remember even asking that question at one point, and they went, well, because you like it. And I was like, no, I cannot be the hub, right? So maybe there is a little bit of the horror stories of owning our own journey, right? And that leaders, to not be that hub, to really start building that learning environment, the resiliency within the team is having that moment when you realize all your best of intentions are not helping your team. It's actually creating that dependency on you.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah. Well, let's switch to some stories of how we've been in situations with our leaders that have been horror stories. These might be easier to yeah.
I when I was first kind of doing this and trying to think of things and stuff like this, I ended up kind of going, God, I've been really lucky. I've had a lot of really amazing leaders, but it's interesting how some of those horror moments just really still stand out all these years later and all those things, because I think in a lot of ways those moments help craft who you want to be as a leader, right?
Yes.
And because you don't always have the control to adjust it when it's your leader, your boss in particular, and things like that. And so I think I took on a very early stance of, I just want to make sure I don't do that. Although I did other things like steal keyboards. So, everybody's got a journey. But I was thinking of one moment in particular. I was at a client site. I was the lead developer. And we were actually teaching this client how to write J2E web apps, and we were doing a bunch of things. And I had a project manager at that time, and his relationship with the client was really starting to break down. Like it was unhealthy on many fronts, but I'm just the lead developer. That's that's the point of contact, right? And all these things. Well, at one point the client approached me and asked me if I agreed with his plan and what he was communicating. And I'm like, I don't know how to respond to that. Like I was panicked, right? But I basically said, in hindsight, I was like, oh, I gave a good answer, but it was a total like fly in the modem. It was just like, I don't know what else he took into account. I don't know all what he considered. If that's what he's saying, that's, I support that, right? And those things. But what I did do was then go back to our mutual manager, right? In our company and go, this is happening. And this is like, what else am I supposed to do if the client approaches me again? Like, I don't want it to be this playing against each other. What should I do? Well, unbeknownst to me, there were other complaints that had been made about him, right, to him, to the manager and things like this. So the next day I showed up at the client site and my project manager walks in and says, Tricia, can we talk? And I said, sure. And then when he pulls me into a conference room at the client site, pulls me into a conference room and tells me how I have just demonstrated disloyalty and that nobody will ever want to work with me again. I started crying. I was like, I didn't, what, like, I had no, because I was such like, I'm trying to be a team player. I'm trying, right? Like, so for me, he was insulting me to the highest levels. Like, and I was like, I don't know what to do. And then just walked out of the room, like totally just like brought me to my knees, walked out there and said, think about it, and walked out of and walked out of the conference room. And I'm just bawling. Like I was just bawling in that moment. And then I was like, do I go back to my manager? Do I, right? Like because now if I go to talk to my manager again, it was, in hindsight, it was like threats, right? But I didn't understand that at that time. It was horrible. It was because it felt so isolating, because then who do I go to for help? And luckily there was somebody else that actually saw me, that was on a different project in the client site, that saw me in that conference room after and approached me. And then, but I was still like terrified, right? I was like, I can't say anything. I'll be betraying, right? Like, and panicked. And he went, no, this is not what is happening right now. And so in my horror story of that part, there was this great leader who was helping me move forward with it. But that idea of just really just intimidating somebody and doing it in a way that was trying to shame them and blame, right? It was pretty early on in my career. And it just got to a place where relationships became a really big, important thing for me, and openness and trust, right? Where in hindsight, I wish I would have said to him, I don't know what I'm supposed to do here, but to ever kind of use your power over somebody in that way. Like that was probably one of my very first examples of somebody power over in a way that was just horrific.
Right. I have two stories. One is a pretty quick one that I think a lot of people who have trouble being included, which is a lot of the groups of folks that we know, will recognize. And it was a time when I became the invisible woman, just to be, stick with the horror story theme. I was invited as a new leader. I was invited into a leadership group, into a meeting that we were having, and I was brought in the meeting room. I was introduced, and then the conversation started. And then a little while we had a coffee break, and so folks were standing in a circle outside the meeting room, drinking their coffee and so on. And I, because I was new to the group, I had been pretty quiet during that first segment up until the coffee break, listening, trying to get a sense of, what are the norms in this group and all the kind of assessing that I do when I enter a new group and sort of figure out what's going on there. And but by this time, by the coffee break, I was feeling more comfortable. And so I'm standing in this group of all men, all taller than me, all in suits. I was dressed well, but I wasn't wearing a suit. And the conversation started. And every time there was or not every time, but when there was a pause and I felt like I had something to contribute, I would say something and the conversation would just go right, completely not acknowledged. And all of a sudden I realized, I think I'm here, but nobody else knows I'm here. Nobody else sees me, right?
Sorry, my friend's dog's down here. Hold on a second.
Okay. So that was one. But then a different kind of horror story is when the leader doesn't really work with their team. And this is a time when I was working with in a group of folks. I was a member of a team that was supposed to be revenue generating for the organization. And our boss got called in to talk to his boss about what kind of revenue goals and so on that, they thought would be appropriate for our team for the next year. So in the team, we got really busy figuring out, how many of us were there, what were kind of our average revenue streams per client, and, different data that we were gathering together to sort of figure out, well, what, do we think we can increase that? Do we think we can do more than what we're doing? And so we came up with a number that we were, willing to share with him. And he goes off to this meeting and comes back and says, well, I've just told my boss that we're going to generate $1 million in revenue next year. And our best guess was that increasing what we had been doing, we might be able to get to 400,000. And we were just all sitting there like deer in headlights, right? How? Because we knew if we did not reach $1 million, he wasn't going to take the blame. It was going to deflect on us. And so we made a couple of attempts at, having a conversation with him and saying, there's nothing in our history that says that with the current staff and the current number of hours there are in a week and the current number of clients we generally get, that tells us we can get anywhere near $1 million, right? And he was like, you're not supportive. You folks, you aren't team players. Well, the smart people on the team just kept their mouths shut, but a couple of us spoke up. And
I question smart in those situations, but
Yeah. And then, well, right. The smart people on the team, the people who didn't want to lose their jobs on the team, where I cared less about what I wanted to do good work more than I wanted to keep that job.
yeah.
And I wanted to meet the goals that we agreed to or that we were given. And I wanted to feel like we as a team were succeeding. And I knew that this was setting us up for failure. And so did a couple of the other people. And so we tried to advocate for a change, but it never happened. And I didn't last out the year in that organization
Yeah.
because I just was like that. The fact that he would just pull a number out of the air and give it to his boss because he thought she would like it better just horrified me, frankly. It's like, really? That's how
And
you do
projected that
business?
on everybody else,
Yeah.
right?
And then making everybody else be implicated in it. Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny, I had other options written down, but while you were talking, it reminded me of, um, you said something to the effect of, I want to do good work, right?
Yeah.
I remember one of the first positions I I resigned. And one of the reasons I kind of resigned, there were many, but one of them was, I did not get a promotion because somebody was doing more hours. Even though I guess so it ties in even that invisible female, right? Like he got it because he did more hours, even though I helped him with his work and I did this, right? Or things like that. And I got more done. But as I was leaving, that senior leader, not even somebody I directly reported to, but it was a senior leader in the organization, was so mad that I was quitting in some way or some form. And I don't even know if we had had a ton of conversations prior to that, but they had said, "Can we talk?" And he delivered this, like, I think he was trying to do some motivating speech or some schooling, teaching kind of speech to me. And then, I mean, keep in mind, I had already resigned. Like, it wasn't like I was just talking about it, right? And he started giving an analogy of, well, Tricia, you focus on trying to build Cadillacs and we only get billed or we are getting paid to deliver Chevys. And I was like, I like, he's like, you can allow more more errors in your work. And I was just, and all I kept thinking in that moment was, I think you have a point, but like, first of all, not a car person. Second of all, like, it's not landing, right? Like, and I, but again, in that moment of just like feeling not heard, feeling not understood, feeling like, but missing the whole point altogether of why I was really leaving and what was really happening, and then trying to blame, right? And saying, well, this is your fault and you want to do too nice of work. And it's like, who doesn't, right? Like who wouldn't want to do a good job? Like, I think that's part of what we all, we highlight in the book is like, there are rarely people going to work going, how am I going to make everybody miserable today? Or how am I going to mess up today? And yet how many times leaders actually use that against you, right? Like you should, it's okay. Just put some crap out there. It's fine. We'll still get paid, right? Like, and that just makes me sad.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think there are a lot of horror stories about things that go wrong, the unexpected consequences of this and that. And I'm sure we all have those. But these interpersonal horror stories, yeah.
I know it's almost hard. And yet,
Yeah.
this is the cool part. I will say this about even doing this doing this activity, right? Honestly, I came in thinking, oh, this was a vent session, right?
Yeah.
Like in some ways in my head when we were talking about this, I was like, oh, we'll get to laugh a little bit, send it out. But it's been an interesting thing to even acknowledge, like you said it right off the bat too, in terms of like, what can you really draw from the horror stories even? So like, yes, in the moment it's horrific and it's traumatizing and it's like, is this happening? But we do get through them, right? And we often form like crazy bonds. Like I was actually talking with somebody yesterday that I worked with back in like 2005, and we were bonding over a crazy horrific issue that had happened then, right? But we can always still take lessons out of these horrible moments. I wish they didn't happen, right? I wish I would have never stolen that keyboard, right?
Yeah.
But on the same note, there are lessons, and there is things to take from it and grow from it and learn from it that, you know, has actually even made me kind of go, I want to almost go back to a lot of other horror stories in my past and going, what's the other story in that narrative, right? What's the other parts of that, not trying to look always for like the silver lining, right? Or being,
Right.
or excusing the bad behavior, but to see the growth, to see the lessons, to see also just like you're not alone, right? Like,
Yeah.
oh, the minute you said the invisible woman, I'm like, oh, yep. Got it.
Yeah, I think there's also the sense that if we do go back and we look at some of those horror stories, I mean, I think of like times when something got distributed and there were errors in it, and it was my job to check the document, and well, and I did, but I didn't, in the way it needed to be, and learning at that time, assigning me to do things that really require a lot of attention to detail, I'm going to have, when that happens, I have to double down on my attention to detail. I have to really set up that scenario. And there are a lot of people who are good at that. And how can I align myself with more of those folks? So, looking at those times when horror stories happened from things that we did that really came about from us trying to work from our limitations or our weaknesses, and learning how to cover, as leaders, how do we create a team that helps to mitigate that makes sure that we've got all the skill sets that this particular piece of work needs, so that we can collectively put out a good job and not rely on trying to work from what just isn't our sweet spot, right?
Building the co-intelligence, right? Building
Absolutely.
that dynamic of the wisdom from not being isolated and just the sole person.
Yeah.
Well, this was fun, and it's already time.
No. I want to hear everybody else's.
I know. So feel free to, obviously, do not put names or company name, like be respectful, right, with the things, but feel free to put in comments and chat and things, horror stories that maybe you want to get off your chest a little bit and acknowledge, and maybe find even that lesson in there along with it as well. So did we confirm that we'll be back in November? We're going to do an appreciation one, and we have a special guest for our next one.
Because we really appreciate her.
Yes. So we'll be posting for that and acknowledging that coming into next month's theme. And we look forward to hearing comments and thoughts about Lead Without Blame.